Okay, so I warned you, and here we are, the inner join practice. This is time for you to get your hands dirty and work on an inner join all on your own. We've already completed our sight reading, and now we're doing our do-it-yourself inner join practice, and that's going to take full 30 minutes, so buckle up. The example that I put together for you today involves the other two tables that we have within our FEC committee data. So we're going to be using the CM20, that's the committee data, and then the candidate underscore 2020 data sets. And I'm asking you to find the following. First, how many committees is each candidate associated with? So you can receive as a candidate multiple donations from different committees. So how many per candidate? Which candidate has the most committees that they are a part of? A subset of that is only look at candidates that are associated with at least 2 seats or 2 different elections. So just to reiterate, what a seat is in this sense is, am I running for the House and the Senate? Am I running for presidency and a House? Am I running for governor? Those would all count as different seats. So you could be one candidate, you could be running for different races, and you can have different committees offering to fund you. And then I have a bonus question. For the candidate associated with the most committees, how much money did they raise? If you remember back to our first example that we did with this data set, we looked at individuals and how they get their money. So we would be looking at committees and then rolling it to the candidate. So just think about that and pause, take a few minutes, and when you're ready, I'll go over the example together. Welcome back. All right, let's open this bad boy up and get started. Okay, so here we have our instructions. We have one question with 2 subparts. First, we want to know how many committees is each candidate associated with? Which candidate has the most committees? And then we only want to look at candidates with at least 2 seats. So if I'm first breaking down this problem, what's the first thing I'm going to do? I'm going to think, okay, well, this filter, because we want to only look at candidates associated with at least 2 seats. So that means I don't want to look at everyone. I only want to look at some people. Which candidate has the most committees that they're part of? Okay, so I'm going to need to do some type of count for number of committees plus a sort. Okay, and then how many committees is each candidate associated with? Again, count by candidate. How many committees? And then I'm going to put in a star, 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 star. Make sure they are unique committees. So what that just means is I need to make sure in my data set that for each committee that there's only one. I'm not going to be getting repeats. So the first thing we're going to start at is, let's start with the committee information. We have committee ID, committee name, da 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 da. Candidate ID. Okay. I'm going to look at my candidate information, candidate ID, and a bunch of other stuff. So this table, candidate and CM, they're attached by candidate ID. That's the next thing I'm going to put. CM is related to candidate via candidate ID. Okay? Very good. So the first thing I'm going to do, let's do select for my candidate information. We're going to take candidate ID, candidate name, and I don't think I need anything else. Let's look at it, because I also want the seats, so I might need that. Seats is the candidate office. Candidate office from here, candidate, and we're just going to limit 10 because I just want to pop open my data, see what it looks like. Okay, so for a given candidate ID, I have a name and I have an office. Okay, great. Now for each candidate, I want to know how many committees he's associated with. So let's also just do a filter for one candidate. And whenever I'm doing joins, this is normally how I start off, is I just want to make sure, does this work for one row? Does it work for one row? If it works for one row, then I'm going to feel good about moving on. Okay, so we have Thomas Lamb. He is this candidate ID. He ran for the House and only the House. Okay, so now I'm going to do my inner join. Let's get us some more space here. Inner join, my committee information. And these are connected using candidate ID. And I'm going to label this. This is candidate. And this CM is committee. Com. And then let me just put my dot notation. And how I did that super cruiser is I did control shift down if you're in Windows. Otherwise, it is the option command in Mac. Okay. So now for the committee, I really just want the committee ID, but we can put the committee name too. Because the ID, as we see with our candidate, doesn't really mean a whole lot. It's just kind of mumbo jumbo. Okay, so now what I've done is I've selected the columns that I would like, specified which ones are coming from my candidate table, specified which ones are coming from my committee table, specified how these tables are connected. They're connected by the candidate ID, and I only want to look at candidate Thomas Lamb. So let's go ahead and hit run. Okay, so now I have candidate ID, Thomas Lamb. He's running for the House, one committee, and the committee is called Committee to Elect Thomas Lamb. Ah, very appropriate. Okay, great. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this off, and then I'm going to look at all of my data, and let's order it. Order by candidate name. Okay, so what I want to do is for each candidate name, I want to count how many different offices they're a part of and how many different committee IDs they're a part of. So let's do that. So we have the candidate ID, the candidate name, candidate office. So we want to count this. Count distinct candidate office as an office. And then we want to do the same here. Count distinct as an committee. And then this bottom one will be name. Okay. Since I have done these aggregate functions, that means I must do my group by. Group by candidate ID, candidate name. Okay, so let's run it. Okay, so all of these have one. So let's take a look. Can I find one that has the number of offices that they're running for more than one? Or I'm sorry, the number of committees that they have as more than one. Let's see. I can do that using having. Having, as I'll remind you, is the filter after you have aggregated. So we want to filter this view here. We don't want to filter the individual views before we summed everything up. We want to filter after we've summed it, what's left, then apply the filter. So that's having, and that's the difference between where. Where happens before the aggregation, having happens after the aggregation. So having n committee ID greater than 1. Okay, so this is looking good, but do I have any that have multiple offices? Let's check that. And office. There is no data to display. Why is that? Well, something that you might not have known or something that might have come up is that one candidate name, they're one person running, for every seat that they run for, they get a different candidate ID. How do I know that? I was dinking around with the table and I figured it out. But how we can verify it is, let's just look at our candidate data. We're going to open it up in a new tab. And I'm going to do select candidate name, count star as total entries from my data. Group by one. Order by total entries descending. Okay, so let's not look at Thomas. Let's look at someone with a 2 or a 3. Let's look at Carol. So basically what I've done is I said, for every candidate name, tell me how many times does he appear in this candidate 2020 data set. And for each entry, it's at the candidate name, the party, and the candidate office level of detail. So I want to see, okay, how many times does Thomas Lamb show up in the data set? Well, he shows up in 1. We wanted to see how many times does Carol, wherever she is, how many times does Carol pop up in the data set? And she came up 3 times. So that's what I did here. By the candidate name, tell me how many rows are there. Okay. So now what I want to do is I just want to look at the base data, my candidate. I'm just going to comment this out. I'm going to do select star. I'm going to get rid of this. And I'm just going to filter for my candidate name. Why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? Because I want to see, okay, my aggregation told me that Carol Hafner shows up 3 times. I want to look at the raw data before I did any of this aggregation and see what happened. This helps me understand the level of detail of the table, and it helps me make informed decisions when I'm doing my data analytics. All right, so we're going to run it. Okay, so look, we have Carol Hafner. She's listed 3 times, each one with a different candidate ID. Every time she ran as a Democrat. Looks like she was running, so this looks like the election years might be a little bit older, 2018. So in 2018, she was running for House in, what's AK? Is it Arkansas? And then she was also running for president for the US. Wow, okay, quite the range. So she was going as a House representative. She was also going for the president. In 2020, she was only going as House. All right, so why does this matter? Why did I take us on this tangent? If we go back to my query, because I'm grouping by the candidate ID in addition to the name, when I look at how many different offices are you running for, are there any greater than 1, I return no rows. Why is that? Because one candidate ID equals 1 seat candidate is running for. So basically I said for each name and the seat that they're running for, how many seats do they have? Well, there's only 1. So if I want to get the information that I really want is how many seats per person, I have to get rid of this candidate ID. He can't be here. So easy enough. Go here. And then what I'm going to put up here in my notes, how many communities each candidate? I'm going to put candidate table is at the candidate name plus seat they are running for. Candidate ID is the candidate plus seat ID. Okay. Okay. So we don't need the candidate ID anymore. We're going to group by candidate name. Now we'll run. Okay. So here we go. We see we have all these different people. So Justin Amash, if I were to go and look at the candidate information, he will be listed in there twice. If I find out the committees that Justin Amash is associated with, he's going to have 2 different committee IDs. I'm going to show you something really cool that I just learned about in Google BigQuery. And this is really good if we're aggregating something like this with strings and we want to be able to like look back and say, hey, can I see what are these committee IDs in here? What are these committee names? I can do something called string ag. String ag, and we're going to do committee ID as committees associated with. So what is this going to do? I think it'll be easier if I just show you. So what this does, the string ag, is it says Justin Amash, he is associated with 2 different committees. What are those committee numbers? These numbers here. C00476291, and then the same thing here. If I were to filter into my committee table, and I said, let me look at those. Let me look at my committee table where my, what is it? Committee ID in, if he's either one of these. And then I have to do some formatting because these are strings. Okay, and if I look at this, this looks promising because I said Justin Amash is associated with 2 different committees. And the first one is called Justin Amash for Congress. That feels really good to me. That feels like that's the right committee. This other one, I don't know what this is. He might just kind of be a general committee. They're both in Grand Rapids, Michigan. They're in similar areas. One is independent, one is libertarian. Okay. So why am I looking at this? Okay, and then you see he's associated with 2 different candidate IDs. So if I were to pull in the candidate IDs that Justin Amash is associated with in our candidate table, it's going to be these 2. Why did I do that? This is really good practice to do whenever you're doing your joins, because when you do the join to your table and then you start aggregating, you lose your ability to see the level of detail and see if you actually did it correctly. So these are just ways, they're like sanity checks, ways to make sure that you're feeling really good about the data that you're doing. I'm also going to show you a really cool trick. If we, and I'm just going to do a copy paste. If we add a format to our string ag, so what does this do? This is the same thing as below here, string ag. So what the string aggregate does is it says every single string that's associated that we're grouping by, I'm going to just stick it in this column separated by a comma. I add in this format, and what this is going to do is it's going to wrap it in the quotation marks. And why does that matter? Well, if I'm doing my little guess and check, instead of having to do before where I did the copy and the paste and then I have to put in the quotations, I can just go like this. Let's look at Dan Bayer. There you go. Dan for Colorado. Shazam. Okay, so this is one that you're just going to want to, I don't want to say like memorize, but this is something you're probably going to put on a sticky note, or if you're taking notes or something, this is one you just want to put as like helpful query. String ag, distinct format. This S thing, this adds the quotation mark to that. Okay, great. So the last thing that I wanted to do is, okay, which candidate has the most committees that they're a part of. Let's get rid of this one. So if we want to get the most committees that they're a part of, then we want to sort by N committee ID descending. And then I think we said at least 2 election seats. So that having, so we want N office greater or equal to 2. And then we want to sort by the committee in descending order. And then we'll use the candidate name as the tiebreaker. So if you have multiple people, then just go alphabetical. Ooh, and I made a typo. Okay, so what did we do? We said, take the name, let us know which committees the name is associated with, count the distinct number of offices that they are associated with, or seats, count how many committee IDs, and then how many committee names. Committee ID should equal committee name, but putting just in case. Okay, so we took this from our candidate data and we said join in our committee data whenever we have a matching candidate ID. We're going to group by our candidate name. So we want it at the candidate name level, and then these are all the things associated with that candidate name. We want to filter and make sure that the number of offices or seats that that given candidate is associated with is at least 2. And then we want to sort by the number of committees that they have in descending order. And then we want to sort by their name in alphabetical. And so if we look at what we have, that's exactly what we have. So we see that we have the number of committee ID is 4. So the most that anyone's associated with in terms of committees is 4. The number of offices that these people are associated with is 2. And that makes sense because the more seats that you're doing, the more committees that you need to raise money for you. We can see using our string ag. Let me see if I can open this up. We can see which committees each person is associated with, and then we see their name. And for these first 5 people, we see that they are sorted in alphabetical order. So we have Brian, Gardner, Mace, McSally, and then Sanders, Bernard, or Bernie Sanders. So if we were to add in addition, if we wanted even more detail, in addition to the number of committees, let's say we wanted to see the number of offices. So we did the can.canned office. Office description. Oh, 2 commas. Okay. So I see for Bradley Roberts, he's associated with the 4 committees. He was running for the House and Senate. So was Corey. So was Nancy. So was Martha. And then for Bernie, I see that he was running for president and Senate. And having lived through the 2020 election cycle, I know that that is correct. Okay, so for the bonus, we needed to find the candidate associated with the most committees and then find out how much that they raised. So what I want to do is I want to get for my committee, I want to attach how many individual donations there were. If I open up my individual donations table, I see that I have committee ID right here. And then I have the transaction amount. So what I want to do, I'm going to open up a new little tab here. I'm going to say select committee ID sum transaction amount as total committee raised from my table. I need my backticks. Group by 1. Okay. All right. So now I have for a given committee ID the total amount that they raised. Okay. So now that I have this piece, I need to figure out a way. To get him into this table. And let's make this a little smaller now. I need to figure out how to connect these two tables. Well, I know that my committee table, I can just attach this thing right into my committee. So I can do that right here. I can do an inner join. And then I'm just going to stick right here in a subquery. Right there. As funds. And how does this connect? How does this connect to everything? This funds table, this connects to my committee table. And if you're like, oh my God, what is happening? I felt like really good about it and all this stuff. I'm literally throwing in a new topic. Don't worry about it. This is just to introduce you to it, and then we'll do more examples like this. So don't worry if it's feeling overwhelming. Okay, so com.committee ID equals funds.committee ID. Okay, and then what I want to do is, because this is at the individual committee, and these guys, Bradley Roberts, Corey Gardner, they're associated with a bunch of committees. I need to sum this up to the candidate name. So I'm going to put this here. Sum my funds dot total committee raised as total candidate raised. So we're rolling it up from the committee level, where it's at individual committees, how much they raised, and I want to see for these 4 committees, how much money. And that's it. And let's... Okay. So for Bradley Roberts, he's associated with 4 different committees. He was running for the House and the Senate, and he raised, that is so much money. He raised $6 million. And we see for Martha, she's raised even more. She's at 11 million. And a question that you might have is, what happened to our dear Bernie Sanders? He was in our top 10 and he's gone now. He actually is a little bit further down here. And I'm going to leave this as a teaser for you, because this is because we were using inner joins. And we'll do this example again, but flipping it to a left join, and we'll kind of go into some more detail. But what we can surmise is that by candidate name, the people that were running for the most offices, at least 2, and the most committees, the most is Bradley Roberts, Martha McSally. This is how much money that they raised. They were a part of 4 committees, and they were running for 2 different offices, the House and the Senate. Let's jump back to the PowerPoint and wrap up this lesson. In today's lesson, we practiced our inner join. We introduced a new aggregate function called string ag, and then we also introduced doing 2 joins at once. In our previous examples, we've only been doing 1 at a time. In our next lesson, we're going to go over one more example in Google BigQuery, just like we did in the prior lesson to this one, and then we're going to start moving into our left joins. So we've been doing inner joins. Next time, we're going to start working on our left joins. See you there.